I didn't stay because I was afraid to leave. I stayed because I felt responsible. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Fear is easy to recognize. Responsibility hides behind virtue. It dresses itself up as loyalty, decency, maturity. It tells you that walking away would make you selfish, weak, immoral. And once you accept that story, leaving stops being an option even when staying begins to cost you everything. I learned that slowly. At first, staying felt like the right thing. Someone needed me. Something depended on me. My presence made life easier for others, more stable, more predictable. That mattered to me. I took pride in being the one who didn't run, the one who endured, the one who held things together when they threatened to fall apart. People admired that about me. I admired it too. What I didn't notice was how often responsibility replaced choice. How many decisions I stopped making because they would complicate things. How frequently I silenced my own doubts because acknowledging them felt like betrayal. I told myself I could handle it. That this was temporary. That once things settled, once the crisis passed, once everyone was okay again, I would finally take care of myself. That moment never came. Responsibility doesn't release you. It expands. The more capable I proved myself to be, the more weight I was given. I became the reliable one. The stable one. The one who would always stay. And the problem with being that person is that people stop asking whether you want to. Days blurred together in a strange way. I was busy all the time, yet deeply disengaged from my own life. I woke up already tired, went to bed already planning the next day's obligations. There was no room left for reflection, and I didn't realize that was intentional. Thinking would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. I began to feel like my life belonged to everyone except me. My time, my energy, my emotional availability all allocated before I ever considered what I needed. When I did feel something surface, frustration, resentment, longing, I crushed it quickly. Those feelings felt inappropriate, almost immoral. How dare I want more, when others needed me to stay exactly as I was? That thought became my internal law. The quiet despair didn't arrive dramatically. It settled in gently. A dull pressure in my chest. A constant background fatigue that sleep couldn't fix. I stopped laughing fully. I stopped feeling excited about anything that wasn't immediately practical. I told myself this was adulthood. Everyone sacrifices. Everyone compromises. Life isn't about happiness, it's about responsibility. That narrative carried me for a long time. Until one night, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had made a decision purely because it felt right. Not useful. Not necessary. Not expected. Right. That realization scared me more than any external crisis ever had. I tried to trace it back. When had I stopped choosing? When had duty replaced desire so completely that I no longer noticed the absence? The answer was uncomfortable. It happened the moment I decided my role mattered more than my presence. I wasn't living anymore. I was maintaining. The darkest part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the guilt. Guilt for feeling resentful. Guilt for imagining a different life. Guilt for even thinking about leaving when so much depended on me. That guilt kept me loyal to a situation that was slowly hollowing me out. I began to realize that responsibility, when taken too far, becomes a form of self-erasure. You don't disappear loudly. You fade politely. You stay useful long after you've stopped being real. People thanked me often. They told me how important I was. How much they appreciated my steadiness. I smiled and accepted it, even as something inside me quietly screamed. Because gratitude can feel like a trap when it binds you to a life you no longer consent to. There were moments, brief, dangerous moments, when I imagined leaving. Not dramatically. Just stepping out of the role. Letting things wobble without me holding them upright. The relief I felt in those fantasies terrified me. Relief shouldn't feel like betrayal. That's when I understood I was in trouble. I wasn't staying because it was right anymore. I was staying because I didn't know who I would be without the weight I carried. Responsibility had become my identity. Without it, I felt undefined. Exposed. Useless. And yet, carrying it was slowly destroying me. I didn't know how to resolve that contradiction. All I knew was that the life I was preserving so carefully was costing me my own existence quietly, efficiently, with my full cooperation. And the worst part, I was being praised for it. At some point, responsibility stopped feeling heavy and started feeling absolute. Not something I carried, something I was. I no longer asked myself whether I agreed to things. I simply assumed I would. My presence had become a fixed element in other people's lives, like a structural beam. Remove it, and something might collapse. That belief kept me in place more effectively than fear ever could. What I didn't want to admit was how carefully I had trained myself into this role. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I stayed silent to keep the peace. Every time I absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't have to. I called it strength. I called it decency. I never called it what it really was, a slow abandonment of myself. The first real crack appeared when my body started resisting. It wasn't dramatic. No breakdown, no hospital, no clear signal. Just small betrayals. Tightness in my chest that came out of nowhere. A constant ache between my shoulders. Mornings when I woke up already exhausted, as if I had been working all night just to exist. I ignored it. Responsible people ignore discomfort. That's part of the deal. But ignoring something doesn't make it disappear, it makes it quieter and more dangerous. I began to notice a change in my thoughts. They became sharper, less generous. I felt irritated by things that never used to bother me. I resented small requests, even as I fulfilled them. I started keeping score internally, counting how much I gave versus how little I received. That scared me. Resentment didn't fit the image I had of myself. I was the reliable one. The steady one. The person who didn't need much. Admitting resentment felt like admitting failure. So I buried it under more responsibility, hoping usefulness would drown it out. It didn't. Instead, something darker emerged, numbness mixed with anger. Not explosive anger, disciplined anger. The kind that stays silent, sharpens itself, and waits. I didn't lash out. I withdrew internally. I became efficient. Emotionally economical. People didn't notice. From the outside, I was functioning better than ever. That's the cruelty of this kind of collapse. The more you disappear, the more stable things appear. The moral dilemma sharpened when I realized something I didn't want to face. My staying was no longer purely generous. It was convenient. For them and for me. As long as I stayed, I didn't have to face the question of who I would be without obligation. I didn't have to risk being unnecessary. Responsibility had given me purpose. But it had also given me an excuse not to choose. Leaving would force me to confront my own emptiness. Staying allowed me to blame circumstance. That realization was humiliating. I started to wonder whether my sense of duty was still ethical, or whether it had become a way to avoid myself. Was I truly protecting others, or was I hiding behind them? That question wouldn't leave me alone. I watched how people reacted when I hesitated, even slightly. Confusion. Discomfort. Sometimes irritation. It became clear how much they relied on my consistency, my availability, my silence. That reliance had weight. And I had helped build it. The guilt intensified. Not just guilt about wanting to leave, but guilt about having stayed this long while slowly detaching. I was present in body, absent in spirit. That felt dishonest. Almost cruel. I began to understand that responsibility without consent turns into quiet violence, not just toward yourself, but toward everyone involved. You show up, but you're not truly there. You give, but without warmth. You stay, but with resentment simmering underneath. That kind of staying poisons everything slowly. There was a night when the thought became unavoidable: if I don't leave, I will eventually become someone I don't respect. Not bitter. Not cruel. Just empty and entitled, silently blaming others for a life I kept choosing. That terrified me more than the idea of leaving ever had. I tried one last compromise. I told myself I would stay, but change internally. Lower expectations. Harden myself emotionally. Become more detached. Less affected. If I couldn't leave, I could at least stop feeling. That was the most dangerous thought of all. Because the moment I considered numbing myself intentionally, I understood how far I had drifted. I was no longer protecting others from pain. I was preparing to sacrifice my capacity to feel in order to maintain a role. That's not responsibility. That's self-destruction disguised as virtue. The conflict reached a point where every option felt wrong. Leaving felt like betrayal. Staying felt like erasure. There was no morally clean exit, no painless continuation. Whatever I chose, something would break. The only question left was what I was willing to break. My role or myself. I didn't yet know the answer. But I knew this: continuing exactly as I was had become impossible. The responsibility I once carried with pride had turned into a weight that was slowly crushing me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask the forbidden question: what if staying isn't the right thing anymore? The moment I finally understood what I had to do was not brave. It was quiet, heavy, and deeply unglamorous. I realized that responsibility had stopped being a choice a long time ago. It had become inertia. And inertia, when dressed up as morality, can keep you trapped forever. I tried one last time to imagine staying, not in theory, not as a value judgment, but as a lived reality. I pictured the coming years unfolding exactly as they had been. More obligations layered on top of old ones. More gratitude masking dependence. More of my energy spent holding things together while my inner life continued to shrink. I saw myself becoming efficient at resentment. Polite in my detachment. Skilled at explaining why I was tired without ever admitting why I was empty. That version of me scared me. Not because it was tragic, but because it was plausible. Because I could see exactly how I would get there: one more "it's fine," one more "they need me," one more day of choosing duty over honesty. The truth I could no longer avoid was this: staying had stopped being an act of care and had become an act of avoidance. I wasn't protecting anyone anymore. I was protecting a role. A role that gave my life structure and meaning without requiring me to ask who I was beneath it. Responsibility had given me an identity that asked nothing of my desire, my curiosity, or my courage. Leaving meant giving that up. And that terrified me. When you've built your entire sense of worth around being needed, the idea of not being essential feels like annihilation. Who are you if no one depends on your endurance? Who are you if you stop being the one who absorbs everything? For a long time, I thought that fear meant I should stay. Now I understood it meant the opposite. I didn't leave dramatically. I didn't explode. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply stopped agreeing to carry weight that was never mine to bear alone. I said no clumsily, imperfectly, with guilt still tangled in my voice. I allowed disappointment to exist without immediately trying to fix it. That was harder than any sacrifice I had made before. People reacted in predictable ways. Some were confused. Some were hurt. Some were angry. A few adjusted. A few didn't. I learned quickly that you can't leave a role without unsettling the people who relied on you playing it. I carried that discomfort with me. I didn't pretend it didn't matter. Responsibility doesn't vanish just because you set it down. It echoes. It questions you. It makes you doubt yourself late at night. But alongside that doubt, something else appeared. Space. Space to feel without immediately suppressing it. Space to ask myself what I wanted without dismissing the answer as selfish. Space to exist without constantly monitoring the stability of everyone around me. The emptiness I had feared wasn't empty at all. It was unfamiliar. Unstructured. Demanding. But it was mine. I didn't suddenly become happy. That would have felt dishonest. What I became was present. Present with discomfort. Present with guilt. Present with grief for the years I had spent being strong instead of being real. That grief was intense. I mourned the version of myself who believed responsibility meant self-erasure. I mourned the years I spent confusing endurance with love. I mourned the trust one had placed in virtue without consent. But grief, unlike numbness, moves. It changes. It makes room for something else. Over time, I noticed that my anger softened. My resentment loosened its grip. When I stopped forcing myself to stay, I stopped blaming others for my own silence. Accountability returned, not the punishing kind, but the honest kind. I could finally admit that staying had been my choice. And leaving was my choice too. That ownership was terrifying and freeing. If you're listening to this because you feel trapped by obligation, by duty, by the quiet pressure to be everything for everyone, hear this carefully: responsibility that destroys you is not virtue. Caring for others does not require abandoning yourself. Loyalty does not mean self-erasure. And staying, when it costs you your capacity to feel, is not noble, it's corrosive. I didn't abandon responsibility. I redefined it. I am still accountable. Still caring. Still capable of showing up. But I no longer offer myself as a substitute for other people's stability. I no longer confuse usefulness with worth. The life I stayed in for so long didn't collapse when I stepped back. But I nearly did while I was holding it up. I stayed because I felt responsible and I lost myself doing it. Leaving didn't make me selfish. It made me real again. And that, I've learned, is the only way responsibility can actually mean something when it's chosen, not endured.